Before we start, I need you to understand something. What you are about to hear is not a story someone made up around a campfire. It comes from case files, from sealed transcripts, from interviews that were recorded and then locked away for decades because the people who heard them did not know what to do with what they contained. Some of what I am about to tell you was never meant to reach the public. Tonight, it does. If you want more cases like this one, cases most people have never heard of, make sure you subscribe before we begin, because what the Hazelridge Sisters said in that interview room in the fall of 1981 is something you are not going to forget for a long time. Part 1. The disappearance. The town of Hazelridge does not officially exist anymore. It was a small logging community in the Pacific Northwest, tucked into a valley surrounded by dense, old-growth forest, with a population that never rose much above 400 people. By the early 1990s, it had been fully absorbed into a neighboring county, and the name faded from most maps. But in 1981, it was still a real place, with a real school, a real church, and two sisters named Carol and Diane, ages 9 and 11, who walked into the tree line behind their family's property on a Sunday afternoon in September and did not come home. Their mother reported them missing that evening when the sun went down, and neither girl answered her calls from the back porch. The search began within the hour. Neighbors, family friends, the entire volunteer fire department, all combed the woods with flashlights through the night. By morning, the county sheriff had called in state police and a team of trackers with dogs. The forest behind the Hazelridge property was thick, old, and easy to get lost in, but it was not enormous. Search teams estimated that a person on foot could walk from one edge to the other in under 4 hours. 2 children should not have been able to vanish inside it for more than a day or two, especially not from a team that size, working around the clock. They were missing for 11 days. Part 2. The search. I want to walk you through what those 11 days actually looked like, because the details matter for what comes later. For the first 3 days, search teams found nothing at all. No footprints, no torn clothing, no signs of struggle, nothing. The dogs would pick up a scent near the tree line and then lose it completely within a few hundred yards, as if the trail simply stopped existing. Handlers described it as deeply unusual. One tracker, a man with over 20 years of experience, told a local reporter at the time that it was the strangest search he had ever worked, because normally even a lost trail leaves some kind of residual scent cone that dogs can pick back up nearby. This one did not. It was as if the girls had been picked up off the ground and carried away without their feet ever touching the earth again. On day 4, a searcher found a single shoe belonging to the younger sister, Diane, roughly 2 miles deeper into the forest than any team had previously searched, in an area that had already been checked twice. It was sitting upright in the middle of a small clearing, laces still tied, as if someone had simply stepped out of it and walked away barefoot. On day 7, 3 separate search volunteers, working in different parts of the forest, independently reported hearing children's laughter, faint and distant, carried on the wind. Each of them followed the sound in the direction it seemed to come from, and each of them lost it within minutes, describing it as moving away from them no matter which direction they walked, almost as if it were staying a fixed distance ahead on purpose. On day 9, the search was scaled back significantly. Officials believed, quietly, that they were now searching for remains rather than survivors. The forest had been picked over so thoroughly by that point that finding 2 living children still undiscovered seemed close to impossible. On the morning of day 11, both girls walked out of the tree line on their own, together, holding hands, completely unharmed. Part 3. What they looked like. Here is where the story starts to become the one that never made it into the papers. The official record, the version released to local news at the time, simply said the girls were found in good health, reunited with their family, and that the case was closed as a resolved missing persons incident. That is technically true. It is also almost nothing close to the whole truth. According to sealed medical intake notes from the county hospital, both girls were physically unharmed in every measurable way. No dehydration, no malnutrition, no exposure injuries, despite 11 days and nights in September weather that had dropped into the 40s overnight on at least 4 of those days. Their clothing was clean, which struck the examining physician as strange enough that he wrote it down twice in his notes, once in the body of the report and once again in the margin, underlined. Clean clothing, he wrote, after 11 days in dense forest. No explanation given by either child. Both girls were also, according to the same intake notes, completely calm. Not traumatized calm. The kind of shock-flattened stillness doctors sometimes see in survivors of terrible ordeals. The physician described it differently. He used the word serene. He wrote that both children smiled pleasantly throughout the examination, answered questions politely, and seemed, in his words, entirely unbothered by having been missing for nearly 2 weeks. Their mother, in a statement given to police the same day, described something that unsettled her more than anything else. She said that when she hugged her daughters for the first time in 11 days, sobbing, overwhelmed, both girls patted her back gently, almost soothingly, the way an adult comforts a child, rather than the other way around. If this is the kind of case you want to hear more about, subscribe now, because what happened during the formal police interview 3 days later is the part that got this recording sealed for over 40 years. Part 4. The interview. On the 4th day after the girls were found, once doctors cleared them as physically fit and psychologically stable enough to speak, a child psychologist and a state police detective conducted a joint interview with both sisters together at their mother's request, since Diane reportedly would not speak unless her older sister Carol was present. The interview was recorded on cassette tape, which is part of why it survived at all, tucked into an evidence archive and largely forgotten for decades until a records digitization project in 2019 rediscovered it. I have listened to a transcript of that full recording. What follows is drawn directly from it, word for word in the sections I am about to read to you. The detective began gently, asking Carol, the older sister, to describe what happened after they walked into the woods that Sunday afternoon. Carol's response, according to the transcript, was calm and immediate. She said they had been playing near the old logging trail when they heard someone calling their names from deeper in the trees. Not a stranger's voice, she specified. She said it sounded exactly like their father's voice, even though their father was at work in town that entire afternoon, which was independently confirmed by his coworkers. Diane, the younger sister, added that the voice knew things it should not have known. It called them by nicknames only their family used at home. It referenced a joke from their father's actual voice that had happened just 2 days earlier at the dinner table. The girls followed the voice deeper into the woods, believing it was truly their father, until they reached a part of the forest neither of them recognized. The detective asked what that part of the forest looked like. Diane's answer, preserved exactly on the recording, was this. She said the trees there did not have any birds in them, and the ground did not have any leaves on it, even though it was autumn and leaves covered every other part of the forest. She said it felt, in her words, like a room built to look like a forest rather than an actual forest. Part 5. The room. This is the part of the recording that officials at the time decided the public should never hear. Carol described what she called simply the room, though she was careful to clarify to the psychologist that she understood the word did not fully fit what she was describing. She said there were no walls that either girl could see or touch, and yet the space felt fully enclosed, the way a room feels enclosed, rather than open like a forest should feel. She said the light there had no clear source. Not sunlight coming through the trees, not moonlight, just a flat gray illumination that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. She said there were other people in the room with them, though she struggled considerably to describe them. And the psychologist noted in his written observations that Carol's voice changed noticeably during this part of the interview, becoming quieter, flatter, almost reciting rather than remembering. Carol said the other people looked correct from a distance, like ordinary adults, some of whom resembled people from Hazelridge that she recognized. But she said that whenever she tried to look directly at any one of their faces, the face would not stay the same for more than a few seconds at a time, shifting slightly, like a reflection on disturbed water. Diane interjected at this point in the recording, and her line is the one that has stuck with me longer than almost anything else in this file. She said, quote, "They kept asking us how many of us there were, and every time we told them, the number felt wrong in my mouth, like the words did not match how many of us there actually were," end quote. The detective, understandably, asked her to clarify what she meant. Diane could not, or would not, explain further. Carol answered instead, saying only that toward the end, right before they were allowed to leave, one of the shifting-faced figures asked them a final question, and both girls answered it together, at the exact same time, in the exact same words, without planning to. The psychologist asked what the question was. According to the transcript, both girls answered simultaneously, their voices recorded together as a single overlapping sound on the tape, and what they said was this. The question was, quote, "Which one of you would rather stay?" End quote. Neither girl would say, on record, what their answer had been. If a story like this one gets under your skin, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now, because what happened to these two sisters after this interview is something the county tried very hard to keep quiet, and I promise you the ending is the part that truly should never have been sealed away. Part 6. After the interview. The recording ends shortly after that exchange. The psychologist's written report, filed separately, recommended immediate and extensive follow-up therapy for both girls, describing their account as, quote, either an elaborate shared delusion consistent with extreme psychological trauma, or a testimony neither I nor this department is currently equipped to properly evaluate, end quote. That second half of the sentence is what got the file quietly buried rather than published. A county government in 1981 had no interest in a case file suggesting anything other than a straightforward, if tragic, missing persons resolution. The Hazelridge family moved away from the town less than 6 months later, relocating to a city several states away, and the local paper reported it simply as a family wanting a fresh start after a traumatic ordeal. That framing was accepted by the community without much question because it was easier to accept than the alternative. Here is what the sealed file does not fully explain and what has never had an official answer. In every follow-up medical checkup over the following 2 years, doctors noted something both families and doctors found difficult to explain. Diane, the younger sister, tested consistently and measurably younger for her chronological age on developmental assessments, by nearly a full year, a gap that neither closed nor worsened over time, simply persisting as a strange, static anomaly that no specialist could account for. Carol, meanwhile, exhibited the opposite. Teachers and doctors alike noted, independently, an unsettling maturity in her behavior and speech patterns that seemed to grow more pronounced with each passing year, well beyond what would be typical even for an unusually bright child. It was as if something about those 11 days had shifted a portion of time itself unevenly between the two of them. As if one girl had been returned slightly early and the other slightly late, relative to whatever it was they had actually experienced. Part 7. Diane's later statement. The file contains one final document, added decades after the original case. In 2019, when Diane, then an adult in her late 40s, was contacted as part of the record's digitization project and voluntarily agreed to a follow-up interview. This is the only part of the story that comes directly from an adult looking back, rather than from a child in the immediate aftermath, and it is, in some ways, the most unsettling piece of all. Diane told the interviewer that she remembered the 11 days far more clearly as an adult than she had as a child, which she found deeply strange, since memory typically fades rather than sharpens with time. She said certain details had become vivid to her only in the last several years, arriving unbidden, usually late at night, in flashes she described as feeling less like memories returning and more like something being deliberately shown to her. She confirmed that the question asked in that room really had been which one of them would rather stay. She said that she and Carol had answered together instinctively, without discussing it, and that both of them had said the same single word. She would not, even in 2019, nearly 40 years later, tell the interviewer what that word was. She said only that she believed the answer they gave was the reason both of them were ultimately released rather than only one. She said one more thing before ending the interview, something that was not in the official transcript released alongside the digitized file, but was noted separately by the interviewer in a personal memo attached to the case. Diane said that Carol, her older sister, had passed away 3 years earlier, in 2016, and that in the final months of her life, Carol had begun insisting, quietly and repeatedly, that someone was recounting her, the same way you would recount money to make sure the total was correct. Diane said Carol used that exact phrase, recounting her, as though she were a number that needed periodic verification rather than a person. Diane said that since her sister's death, she has occasionally felt the same sensation herself, a quiet, internal awareness of being tallied. She said it does not frighten her the way it once might have. She said, and this is the last line in the entire file, quote, I think we always knew part of the arrangement was that eventually, one of us would have to go back, and I have simply been waiting to find out whether it will be me." End quote. There is no further documentation in the file after that statement. No follow-up interview was ever conducted. As far as public records show, Diane Hazelridge is still alive today, living quietly, and has declined all further contact regarding the case. Part 8. Closing. I have gone back through this transcript many times while researching this case, and there is a detail buried in the original 1981 medical intake notes that I have not yet mentioned, one that the examining physician recorded almost as an afterthought, in a single line near the bottom of his report. He noted that during his physical examination of both girls, he counted their fingers and toes as a routine part of the pediatric assessment, standard procedure for any case involving prolonged exposure. He recorded the number 20 for each girl, which is, of course, entirely normal. But in the margin beside that line, in different ink, added at some later date by someone whose handwriting has never been identified, is a single handwritten note. It says only this: "Recount before releasing file." Nobody knows who wrote it, or when, or why. The file was released anyway. If this case has stayed with you the way it has stayed with me, subscribe before you go, because there are more sealed files, more cases the public was never meant to see, and I promise you the next one is just as hard to shake as this one was. Stay careful out there. And if you ever hear a familiar voice calling you deeper into somewhere you do not recognize, do not follow it. No matter whose voice it sounds like.